Yeah, one thing that really struck me as you were talking about that was that one of the key aspects of conversation is the ability to listen, to really hear what the other person is saying, so that you can change, discern whether that's how that statement, or whether that statement makes sense to you, and if it does, based upon your experience of the world, then change your mind. Realize that there is something that you had not seen. There is something for you to learn about the way things are in the world. It's a learning stance, but it comes from, you need to be able to listen. One needs to be able to listen deeply to be able to do that.
I'd actually expand on that a little bit and say that we are always already listening. We are trained to listen or not from the time we come into the world. As we grow up, our family teaches us what's important to listen to, and school starts to expand on that, and friends, and by the time we become young adults, we've been trained to listen in very specific ways. Very rarely does anybody actually say, I'm going to teach you how to listen to something. And if you do some Google searching, on listening, for example, you'll find that there's this huge number of things that come up around listening to music, and an equally large number of things that come up around pastoral counseling, listening for people who are trying to express some deeper spiritual aspect of themselves. But there's very little out there on the web and in the media about just listening in conversation and listening for what's important. And I think this is a kind of a tragedy, actually, that we don't have more solidly grounded processes around listening that we teach people how to listen. I've developed a course on collaboration, and it starts with listening, and I actually tie listening to breath, and I use a combination of an old indigenous Native American process of listening they call listening ears, and Otto Scharmer, who's a fellow over at MIT, who's developed something called the presencing, and his work is in Theory U. And he's described 4 levels of listening. There's listening, what he calls downloading, which is listening from habit. So we do that all the time. We're looking for the things that confirm our view of the world. Oh, hey, great. I really like you. You've got a lot of points of contact with me where we both affirm our views of the world, right? So that's the habit part. And then what he calls listening from the outside, which is, oh my goodness, I just had a conversation with someone whose stance in the world is so different from mine, and their way of looking at the world is so different from mine. It's amazing, and I'm really intrigued because they're a very interesting person, and they seem to really have a lot of good qualities, and I have to open myself up. I have to open my listening and deepen my listening to take in what they're saying and recognize there is a very different way of looking at the world that's equally valid to mine. And then there's another deeper layer of listening that Scharmer talks about, which he calls listening from within. And that's the listening at the empathic level of, how does the world show up for this person? What is this person saying underneath their words? What's been their experience? Who are they? And sometimes that has a lot to do with listening to stories as opposed to facts, which are so important because we relate to each other through stories. I'll talk about that in a second, because that goes back to conflict. And then the last level of listening that he talks about, which is tied to will, is listening from source. And listening from source is very difficult to describe because it's almost ineffable, and yet it's also really easy to illustrate because you'll hear something that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, or you get goosebumps, or your stomach flip-flops, or you just go, yes, you lean for yes, because somebody says something that lights you up. And when you hear someone say something that lights you up, that means that the very thing they're talking about is enlivening to the both of you. And that means that it's a source of life. It's a source of growth, of generativity, of innovation. And when you can train your body to be in the states that recognize and are open to those different types of listening, then you can find the sources for creativity, generativity, and innovation much more easily. But they are definitely, they don't come from sitting here and saying, okay, I'm gonna think about listening from source. There's actual physical ways, somatic ways of attuning yourself to that. And if you want to know those, you have to take my course.